Welcome to the Cohort Sisters podcast, where we give voice to the stories, struggles, and successes of Black women with doctoral degrees. I'm your host, Dr. Jami, and today we have a true trailblazer in our midst, Dr. Jami Valentine Miller. She made history as the first African American woman to earn a PhD in physics from Johns Hopkins University, and her journey has been one of breaking barriers and inspiring change. She's the founder of the organization African American Women in Physics, and she's committed to fostering diversity in STEM. Dr. Miller's outreach work with young physicists and engineers is equally impactful, and beyond her thriving career, she's a wife, a mother, a licensed Zumba instructor, and an explorer of cultures through travel and cuisine. So welcome to the Cohort Sisters podcast, Dr. Miller.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
So am I. So I know that we just kind of heard about your accomplishments and accolades, but tell us a little bit about who you are, like really, like where are you from? Where do you live? What are some things that you like to do when you are not being well, I guess you can't stop being a trailblazer in STEM, but what are some things that you like to do when you're not on the clock?
I'll start from the beginning. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I grew up in a time, fortunately, where there was a thriving program to encourage minorities who were interested in engineering careers. It was Prime, Philadelphia Regional Introduction for Minorities to Engineering. And that program allowed kids who were interested in engineering and who had some talent in math to spend each summer on a different local university campus learning prep for classes that they would take in the fall, taught by campus students. So you got like this whole pipeline of energy and education where you had professors, you had undergrads, you had grad students, you had high school, you had middle school. I think I started in around seventh grade and I stopped around 11th grade. So I was very fortunate to be a part of that program. I also went to a gifted middle school, which also helped, even though it was it was kind of in flux at the time because Philadelphia is a city that back in the 80s was still doing busing and desegregation. So there were some challenges there. But I feel fortunate for the time I was there. When I got to high school, I attended a vocational technical high school, which means that everybody had a trade. So I'm a big believer in having a trade. If college is not for you, there might be a trade that will help you to have a very successful and profitable life. My trade was computer science, so that put me on a college track. And during my senior year, we had our college fair. It's a small school, but the college fair came and different universities came. And I was very fortunate that the national alumni president for Florida A&M University was from Philadelphia. And so he personally went and took a team to every single high school in Philadelphia, including my little old hood high school. And at the end of their spiels, he was like, all right, now I want to see your valedictorian and your class president. And I said, well, doesn't he want to talk to me too? And he said, well, why do we want to talk to you? And I said, well, I have the highest SAT score in the school for the past 5 years. All right, well, you come too. You come too. And so from that, they hosted a trip for top students in Philadelphia who were interested to travel down to Tallahassee to Florida A&M University for their student preview week. We got to meet the president one-on-one, Dr. Frederick Humphreys, may he rest in peace. And he, on the spot, offered me a full 4-year scholarship, including 4 summer internships to Lawrence Livermore National Lab. I mean, who could say no, right? I was like, I'm
Wow.
in, get my t-shirt, I'm going to be here, I'm a rattler, let's go. So that is how I ended up attending Florida A&M University. While I was there, I had a great time. I learned a lot. I made a lot of good friends. And it was really a unique time at the university because the president focused on bringing in as many top Black scholars, undergraduates, as he possibly could. So, 2 of my 4 years, something like that, we had more national merit scholars than Harvard. And
Okay.
so it's not weird for me to be a physics major, right? My roommate was a chemistry major. My current husband, who I met at FAMU, is computer science. And there was a girl who won $1 million in scholarships. And, I just had this one. So I didn't feel like I was standing out by being a physics major. It was very normal to be a Black
Mm,
scholar at that time. And so it was a wonderful place to learn and grow.
Yeah.
When I left FAMU, I applied to graduate schools, and I'm going to do a little more detail here than I would do for most because this is the cohort sisters group. So, I want to make sure that y'all know. When I got ready to choose a graduate school, my advisors at FAMU said, I got into a number of good schools, and they said, you should go to Vanderbilt because we know people there. We know that they have had other people who have graduated. We know you'll be well treated. We can peek in on you. And I said, I am going to pick this Ivy League school because it's Ivy League. Ooh. And that's what I did. And so I went to Brown University in Rhode Island, where it was a very good school. I had a great learning opportunity, and I did good research. But I really was challenged with those qualifying exams. It was 2 days, 8 hours a day, and I took it once. I failed. I took it a second time, and I did not pass. And so I had to leave. So I said,
Wow.
okay, I talked to my advisor at FAMU, I talked to my research advisor at Brown, and my advisor at Brown said, Jami, I know that you are excellent in the lab and you can be a good physicist. If you choose to reapply to grad school, I will write a strong letter for you. And of course, everybody at FAMU was like, we know you can do it. You should go to Vanderbilt. They still want me to go to Vanderbilt. Um, and so I put on my brown sweatshirt and I printed my resume on very nice paper. Y'all don't do that anymore. And I went to I went to the National Society of Black Physicists conference, which was February. I think I had the exam in January. The conference was in February. And so I said, I'm going to go to every recruiter who's at this conference because these are schools who actually really are interested in having Black students and helping them to succeed and do their best. And when I got there, I was really struck by the students and a professor who were at the table for Johns Hopkins University because they were so chipper. They were just happy and cheerful. And so, in my opinion, at that time at Brown, the undergraduates were deliriously happy and the grad students were really kind of miserable. But at Hopkins, the undergraduates are so stressed out
Yeah.
because they're 65% pre-med, they're 25% engineering, everybody needs an A in physics, and the grad
Mhm.
students are kind of like, hey, you know what? We gotta live. So I made the switch. I applied and got in it and switched to Johns Hopkins University, which was a great move for me. Long story short, I was the first African American woman to get a PhD in physics at Johns Hopkins University. But as I look back and as I have done my research, which I'll talk about a little bit more, I was also the first African American woman to get a degree in physics from Brown University. Brown founded in
Oh,
1764. I was the first Black woman to leave FAMU and continue on to get a PhD in physics, not all fields, in physics.
yeah.
So I'm like Dr. First, and I own it now, and I'm super happy for all of my experiences. But for all of you out there who are also Dr. First, nobody is going to tell you. Nobody told me
Mm.
until I started doing research on it. So if you've never heard of somebody at University of Wichita getting a PhD in biochemistry, you might be the first and look it up and claim it. So
Yeah.
that's my educational experience. As I was finishing up at Hopkins, I was really feeling a sense of isolation. And so there was the year was like '05. And so I went to the big physics conference and then there was an international conference for women in physics in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Ooh.
And then I went to the NSBP conference. And so I had met all of these different Black women in various fields in physics. And I said, I'm just going to start. I have a notebook. I'm going to write their name down, what school they're at, what's their email address. And then I converted that into an Excel spreadsheet. I made it into a website. And then as I continued to keep track of all of these different women in physics, eventually that became African American Women in Physics Incorporated. And so now we are a small nonprofit who seeks to continue to increase diversity in physics, astronomy, and all related fields. We certainly help undergraduates, grad students, and postdocs, and we do what we can to help them to be encouraged and stay on track. But we also do senior scientist check-ins where we talk to the older dolls in physics and astronomy, and we make sure that they are okay, and we listen to what they have to say for hours on end if they want to, because the truth of it is that people older than my generation, and I'll be 50 next year, if you were a woman in STEM and you're older than me, if you decided to start a family, you might have gotten kicked out of your lab and lost your health insurance. That was still happening in the 90s. So a lot of our older scientists don't have children. Some do, many don't. And so I'm all of their daughter, and I just check in on them and we make sure that they're doing okay.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many amazing things that you brought up. I'm like, where do I even start? Like, do I talk about the childhood programs? Do we go into like the intergenerational nature of your organization? I kind of want to go in chronological order. So we're definitely going to get back to AAWIP, but let's start. Why physics? What is it about physics that interested you, that sparked your curiosity?
So I was really good in math and science. I can recall my junior year in high school. I'm not athletic. I'm kind of klutzy, but I was the team manager, so I can keep the statistics and all that stuff. And so I would miss the physics class 2 or 3 days a week, but I always show up on exam day, and I was like, but I would do well in the exams. And so my teacher, Mr. Rabinowitz, was like, you're really good at this. You have a talent for it. And so, because of that prime program, I knew I wanted to choose an engineering field. And because I grew up in the projects in North Philadelphia, I knew I needed a full scholarship. And so, when I looked at all the magazines, I said, okay, well, everybody and their mama is major engineering, and nobody's choosing physics. So, I'm going to pick physics because it will increase my opportunities to get a full ride scholarship.
Mm.
Because only crazy people are going to choose physics. I could have chosen anything, but I was like, I will increase my odds to get a full ride if I choose physics, and that did work out for me. So I had an interest, of course, and I had a
Mhm.
natural talent towards it, but mostly it was because I really needed a full ride scholarship.
Yeah, I love the like calculations that you are already doing in high school. Like I know what I need to succeed in life and I'm gonna make it happen. Good for you. I don't know if high schoolers today are thinking that way with all the TikToks and whatnots that occupy their time. But I love that tenacity and really the desire to control your own destiny. So I appreciate you sharing your experience at Brown because there aren't a lot of people who talk about, or actually, I haven't met a lot of people who have had to transfer doctoral programs like unwillingly. And so, can you kind of talk about, how did you feel when they said that you couldn't stay? And how did you channel that feeling into action? Like, did you wallow a little bit in your thoughts? Did you cry? And then how did you kind of transform and then, pick yourself up and then start going to that conference to find another program for you?
So for me, of course, when we're young, we know everything. So I'm like, oh, this is a travesty. I've been robbed. But I mean, I know that like looking back on the question that I didn't perform up to the highest standard. So it's fine. But I also knew I'm a good scientist. Like it's okay. So I gave myself maybe a day or two to have a pity party and to cry and, and call my mom and all that stuff. But then I reached back to my professors at FAMU and I talked to my research advisor, who's James Vallis. He's still at Brown today. And I said, okay, well, let's make a plan to move forward. Either I can go back to Philly and fry French fries at McDonald's, or I can reapply to grad school because that was always my fallback, which is not a
Mm.
great fallback because as I haven't mentioned, I'm a patent examiner for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I could have left Brown and taken this very same job and had a great life. But for me, I was so focused on getting the PhD because
Mm.
my entire undergraduate career, they're like, well, if you're going to major in physics, you have to get a PhD. Because part of the goodness that comes out of HBCUs is that they push you towards the highest goals possible and they inspire you and hype you up like, look, you're going to do it. You're going to be great. Everybody, oh, yes, we're all here for you. So when I failed that exam and I reached back to those professors, they said to me, oh, this professor also had to leave his program because of exams. And this professor
Mm.
had to leave his program because of exams. It is
Mhm.
common. In fact,
Mm.
I don't know why Neil deGrasse Tyson left his program and finished somewhere else, but it's very common that people leave one program and finish somewhere else, whether it's an exam or an advisor or the climate or whatever it is. And so I love to tell my story so that
Yeah.
students know if it's not working, you can move. You can go somewhere
Mm.
else because you can have a different experience that would be more healthy for you. So at the time I was very embarrassed. I felt shame, but I also was very determined. I felt like this is something that I have a calling and a drive to do, and nothing but God can keep me from it. Not the
Yeah.
the color purple, but I'm going to continue as far as I can until somebody tells me that it's absolutely it just can't be done. And so
Hmm.
perseverance was a strong part of it.
Hmm. Yes, I absolutely love that. Another thing that you mentioned was how you were not only the first at Hopkins, but you discovered that you were the first, in these other places. Can you kind of talk us through like how you actually went about figuring out that you're the first? Like, did you email someone like and say, "Hey, can you confirm whether or not I'm the first Black woman to get a doctoral degree here?" Just like, what did that actually look like?
So for me, I there's a young woman. She's a current grad student named Jamel Watson Daniels, and she completed her bachelor's in physics maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And she's a rock star. And she was like, she gave one of the class speeches at graduation at Brown, and she's amazing all around. But in the articles that they wrote about her, they said she is the first African American woman to get a bachelor's in physics from Brown University. And I
Wow,
said,
like
"Oh,
5 years ago. Wow.
yeah. Well, if she's the first to get a bachelor's, then and we have no PhDs, then that makes me the first to get a master's. So first to get any degree." And then for FAMU, because I keep the history of all Black women in physics on my website at aawip.com,
Mhm.
I was able to see no other people had a bachelor's degree from FAMU who had completed a PhD elsewhere. Now, I think that when I was 17, 18, if they had said to me, "Oh, you have to get a PhD. After all, you'll be the first." Oh my gosh, I would have been intimidated. My mind would have been like, I don't know that they knew or didn't know, but it would have
Mhm.
definitely been too much of
Yeah.
a weight to bear. But also, we are the gatekeepers of our history. And if we don't
Mm.
keep our history, nobody else is going to do it. When I call
Mhm.
schools every year and say, "Oh, do you have any, African American women who have graduated or who are grad
Mhm.
students?" And for the most part, they don't keep those statistics. The
Mm.
NSF does annual surveys, but they didn't always ask questions on these things because our numbers were so low. So
Yeah.
we're the gatekeepers of our history, and a lot of us are first, and we just don't know because we never asked. We're just like putting our head down and staying in the lab and getting our work done.
Yeah, yeah, that's so fascinating. I'm wondering, I'm like excited actually to hear if after folks listen to this episode, if there's anyone who is like, who finds out that they ended up being the first or that they will be the first. If that's you and you're listening or watching, please let us know so we can hype you up and celebrate you because it's amazing, but it's also astonishing to me that in the year 2023, they're still the first. Like we're still checking off boxes. It's crazy. I love it for us, but it's still, I'm just like, wow, in this millennia, we're still making history. Whew, we have a long
Yeah.
way to go. Let's talk about mentorships. When you finally landed at Hopkins, at the program where people were chipper, I'm like envisioning people being happy at this conference, and I feel like that's so funny. Did you have any Black women mentorship? It sounded like you had a lot of really strong mentors at FAMU, but at Hopkins, what was it about Hopkins, aside from the graduate students being happy? What kind of mentorship did you receive there, especially if you had any mentorship from Black women or other women of color? How did how did that mentorship kind of like help you persevere?
So at Hopkins at the time, there were no African American professors in the physics department. It's the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and we didn't have any. Hopkins is very closely aligned with the Space Telescope Science Institute, which is across the street. They run the Hubble, and I think they run the James West, the JWST. And so I didn't get African American mentorship in the physics department, but I definitely had professors in the physics department who were in my corner and who were there to cheer me on when times got tough. One thing that was very different about Hopkins is that when I left the physics department and met with other Black grad students, 90% were in STEM. As
Mm-hmm.
opposed to at Brown, the other Black grad students, there was a huge MAT program. There was like most of the Black grad students were in social sciences.
Yeah.
And it was just like five of us. who were, physics, engineering, or whatever.
Mhm.
And so at Hopkins, we were all in STEM. So if I said, "Oh, I haven't seen sunlight in a week," they're like, "Me either. I've been in the basement." They could kind of relate to what's going on, and
Yeah.
that made a difference for me. So
Mm.
I had those close interactions. Also, because Hopkins is in Baltimore, which is a predominantly Black city, most of the support staff is African American. And so there's a cleaning lady who would come and clean my office every day. And at the holidays, she'd bring me a sweet potato pie. "Baby, you still here?" And she would look out for me. And the girl at the coffee cart would look out for me
Mhm.
and just check in on me because, you need many different types of circles of people who support you. You have your homegirls, you have your family, you may have a sorority, you may have, friends from when you're elementary school. You need all of those different circles
Yeah.
to support you in different ways. And so I got a lot of that at Hopkins. I was involved in the Black Faculty and Staff Association, which was essentially people who've been at Hopkins for 30, 40, 50 years as an admin or as, whatever their position is. They've
Yeah.
seen it all. They know what everything is. And so that was very, very helpful for me. And I'm grateful to all of those different circles for helping me to get through. And of course, my research advisor, who was a very traditional Chinese tough love kind of advisor. He treated me exactly the same way that he treated all of his Chinese students, except that I was not Chinese. So I was like, "Oh, I'm being tortured." But in the end, I was like, "Oh, actually, he's treating me the exact same way, but they understand it in a way that I didn't
Mm.
until I read the book Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. If you have a Chinese research advisor, go get that book and read it. He was loving in the way that he knew, which
Mm.
felt very painful at the time, but now I recognize it as just tough love to make
Mm.
sure that
Mhm.
when I went out into the world, that I would be prepared, that nobody could come at me harder than he was going to come at me. So I was ready for any question or any challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you had such a positive experience, um, and that you were able to complete your degree so that you can continue to inspire others. I want to talk about, towards the end of your dissertation process, towards the end of the doctoral degree, what were some of the different choices that you were weighing in terms of what your next career steps would be? Did you consider doing more research? Did you consider an academic career at all? What were you kind of thinking at the time? And then how did that translate? Kind of walk us through your career path right after, or right before you defended to the present.
Sure. So I watched a number of the African American professors who were at Hopkins, and I noticed that not only did they have to do their research and be excellent, but they had to provide community service. They had to be the faculty advisor for the
Mm,
different African American student groups. They had to do
yeah.
campus outreach and local outreach, and they were burning out. And at the same time, they had to always convince other people that I'm here because I'm qualified, not because I'm African American. And I decided for me, I was like, I mean, in physics, the pretty much prescribed route is you're going to do a postdoc and apply for assistant
Mhm.
professor and move forward.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm kind of halfway on that train, but also I don't want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm qualified. I'm just tired. And
Mhm.
so my advisor was like, "Well, listen, I'm not going to let you set a defense date until you have a job. What will I say to your mother at graduation if you don't have a job?" Oh, right. And he's very intimidating, dramatic man. And I was like, "You know what? I'm going to take the first day smoking." And so the patent office at the time was hiring in huge numbers. They doubled the number of examiners they had over a 2 year period. They were hiring 100 people a month for 2 years. And so I applied, I got in, it was an 8 month paid training. And I said, "Okay, I'll do this. And then if these postdoc offers come rolling in, then I'll, consider." But it turned out that this was the right job and the perfect job for me. I've been here for 17 years. And I still love it and I still recommend it to people. But yeah, I took the job because I needed a job to get out of grad school.
Okay, but it turned out to be a job that you love. So, can you talk a bit about how your doctoral training prepared or equipped you for the role that you have and that you love so much?
Yes. So what a patent examiner does is we read an application. It looks very much like a journal article. It's got an abstract, drawings, a description, and all that stuff. And at the end, it has a set of claims. We have to study those claims, make sure that they're written clearly and unambiguously, and then we search to see, has this been done before? is it novel and is it a non-obvious improvement over what's already out there? Like, so if you're just the first person to combine a camera and a telephone, that was really new. Now we have a camera phone, but now camera
Yeah.
phones have been out for a while. So if you just paint it blue, that's not really non-obvious. Anybody could have done that. So my role is to search, see has it been done. If I cannot prove that it's been done before, then applicant, oh, and that is not obvious, applicant is entitled to a patent. And so I get to look at new technology all the time. Because I was a grad student, I understand how to analyze a journal article. I understand how to look at a novel problem and break it into its constituent parts and see, boundary conditions, all that kind of stuff. And I'm fortunate that I'm placed in a technology that's related to the work that I did in grad school. So I look at semiconductor devices and their methods for manufacture. And that also encompasses magnetic RAM, which is kind of spintronics, which is where I did my graduate research. So I can remember, oh, I remember it was 2013 when this guy gave a talk at the conference, and everybody's like, oh my God. So I know when that article came out, I know right where to search for it to see if this is new or if they're just changing materials, if it's really significant. And so the parts I love about my job is seeing new technology. Um, Being able to relate it back to things that are important to me from my previous research, and also knowing that the work that I do is important to somebody out there because a single patent can spin off a whole company. So sometimes there's one guy waiting in his garage. He's like, I can't wait to get my patent. And I know that the work I do is important. So that's some of the things I love about my job.
Yeah. It's always like so pleasant when people like really love the work that they do, and it doesn't happen that often anymore. I think especially with millennials and Gen Zers, what do they call millennials? They call us like the job hoppers. So I always get encouraged when I hear folks who really find passion in the work that they do and also can relate that work to their research, and so it doesn't feel as if your doctoral degree was a waste. In fact, it really has equipped you and made you an expert in your field so that you can do this role really, really well and really excellently. Out of
But
curiosity, do you,
let
oh,
me
go ahead.
add one thing. Because I work for the US federal government, they cannot give us big bags of money. So what they do instead is give us quality of life. So I have
Mm,
lived here in sunny Florida for the past 11 years. Every 2 weeks, which is a pay period, I need
mhm,
to get 80 hours in 2 weeks. I can get that done generally almost any time because I'm not a morning person. I'm an evening doll. So I can work from 2 to 10. That works. They're like, as long as you get it done. If I want to
yeah.
take vacation, I can smush my hours into the second part of the bye week. They are very flexible with that. I'm dressed up for y'all, but usually I'm in my pajamas. I'm able to volunteer at my son's school and to, go to give tech day or teacher,
Mhm,
what do we call it? They call it, I can't think of the name, teach in, where you teach the
okay.
kids about what your profession is. And so I do that and I go on field trips. I'm able to spend some time with working on my nonprofit outside of my work hours.
Mhm,
I really have a lot of flexibility and I have a reasonable salary, but it's not the big bags of money that I would get if I work in an industry.
mhm. I appreciate that context because I think that in STEM specifically, it seems as if the conversation is often in terms of career, either academia or like high paying industry. And so it's good to have additional options, such as a government job that might not be eight figures, but you have a much higher quality of life. So thanks for reminding us that quality of life is just as, if not more important than your salary when you are considering a postdoctoral career. There was
And
another question
I
that
just want
oh,
to add
yes.
one last thing, which is that even because we're government, we don't often recruit, but we are
Mm,
almost always hiring because no engineer wakes up and says, I want to be a patent examiner. No lawyer is like, ooh, I want to be a patent examiner. But the U.S. Patent Office is the American STEMicist safety net. We will hire you when you're fresh out of college with no experience. We will hire you when you retire from a big company because nobody has patent experience. We're the only patent office. So if you're ever like, what am I going to do? Please consider patent office. Okay.
so actually that was going to be well similar to a question that I had, which is, what kind of fields um perhaps are there any fields outside of STEM where if someone's getting a doctoral degree in that field, they would still be able to be eligible for a role at the patent office, or do you feel like it's, specifically for folks who have specialized in STEM?
So all examiners have to have a STEM degree, but
Okay.
there are roles in like HR and our outreach and education departments where the non-STEM people would be able to help.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, thanks so much for clarifying that. So now I want to go back to talking about the African American Women in Physics organization. I always also love chatting with folks who have nonprofits. It's a fellow nonprofit founder and executive director. Would love for you to share a couple of the initiatives that you've done to promote diversity and inclusion in STEM and specifically in physics and astronomy.
So most of what we do is to build up a community because most African American women who are in a physics or astronomy program, they're probably the only one in their program
Yeah.
unless they're at an HBCU. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's maybe 4 or 5 HBCU programs. So
Mm-hmm.
what we do is we have our small community, we have a private network where students can talk to each other and say, hey, I'm in Iowa and I'm struggling in my quantum class. And you can talk to somebody who's like, I'm in Maine and I'm struggling in my quantum class. They're using the same textbooks. So
Mm-hmm.
they can have that relation and that feeling of like, I'm not the only one,
Yeah.
which often helps people to remain in their programs rather than leaving. They don't
Yeah.
feel like they're so isolated. So that's
Absolutely.
really part of the core of what we do. The next piece is the record keeping because we keep track of everyone who has a PhD in physics or astronomy or planetary science. We also try to keep track of nuclear science. We're expanding the idea of what a physicist is because some
Okay.
people who do physics don't have physics degrees. Some people who have physics degrees don't do physics.
Yeah.
And so we're just trying to keep track of that. We want to make sure that the greater physics communities are doing things that serve African American women in
Mm-hmm.
particular. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, we noticed and read that there's been some issues with harassment at certain conferences. And when we talk to the people who run those conferences, or when we read about what the people who are managing the conference are doing, our young ladies still don't feel safe. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have joined the Society's Consortium Against Harassment in STEM with 2 M's. And our board members attend their conferences and are participating to make sure that we know how best to inform our members on what they can do so that they don't uh, become victims of harassment
Mm-hmm.
and so that they know what to do if they are harassed at a conference. We also want to inform societies on what they can do to reduce likelihood of
Mm-hmm.
harassment. So there was an example, and this came from a training I had. There was a conference and they had a poster session for undergrads, and so they were in a narrow hallway. But then at the conference room at the end of the hallway, they had some kind of like, let's call it old scientists wine happy hour. And so you had all of these old scientists coming out of their social hour down this narrow hallway past all of these undergraduate students. And it just was not a great look. So we want to make sure that conferences are planning and are aware of ways that they can reduce opportunities for harassment.
Right.
Um, yeah, so we are that's another one of our main focuses is reducing harassment
Mm-hmm.
of our students and our members and our adults,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just students, when
Yeah.
they are attending various conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And of course,
Yes.
senior scientists check in and I think, and yeah, retaining the history. I think that's the main
Mm-hmm.
things. We also have
Yeah.
a little book club that we do. We've
Okay.
done for the past couple of years, where so I think our first one was Malika Grayson's book, like Black Girl PhD. I might have the
Mm-hmm.
title wrong. I have to check my shelf. And she was
The
kind
Black
enough
Girl's
to
Guide to the
do
PhD.
Black Girls Guide to PhD. Thank
Yep.
you. She was
Mm-hmm.
kind enough to do a book author chat with our members, and we gave away
Nice.
copies of the book. And then the next year we did Dr. Chanda Prescott Weinstein's book, um, and she also chatted with our students. The title is, why am I blanking? Oh my gosh, I'll Google it. Chanda, don't hate me. I know the title of the book.
We'll also put it in the show notes so folks will be able to find it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, It's called, it'll be in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
Disordered Cosmos. That's it. And then this year, another African American woman in astronomy, Dr. Aomawa Shields published her memoir. And so she was kind enough to have her publisher send copies for our members. And we're going to try to do a book chat. She's on a book tour, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to get her to come to speak with us this year. But we're definitely going to discuss the book because there's so many good lessons in there about, the various ways that we show up as we go through these different programs.
Mm-hmm. I am so excited. We also had a book talk with Dr. Grayson in our first year, which is exciting that our worlds have overlapped in terms of the folks who are interested in. There's so few of us doing not only STEM work, but especially like now writing about our experiences of going through graduate school and turning those experiences into advice for other people. So Dr. Grayson's book is one that we absolutely love and recommend to our community as well. I want to kind of circle back to this intergenerational piece that you've mentioned, not only in AAWIP, but kind of circling back to the Prime program that you did when you were a kid, because you kind of talked about there were faculty and graduate students and undergraduates and high schoolers and middle schoolers, and kind of just thinking about how we developed a pipeline for people to be interested, people like us to be interested in STEM. And then now on your organization side, you are not just cultivating and supporting graduate students in physics and related disciplines, but as you mentioned, senior sister check-in. What was the title again? Sorry.
Senior scientist check-ins.
Yes, senior scientist check-in. What is the importance to you of working intergenerationally in terms of supporting the diversity, inclusion, and an equity for Black women in physics? Why is that important to you to do that work across generations?
Well, two reasons come to mind. The first one is that our seniors still have a lot to teach us. I know that as I get older, there are lessons that I would not have told other undergrads when I was younger, but today I'm like, oh, this is important that you know this. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that as our senior scientists get older, and I know that they would not love me calling them senior scientists, even though they're over 70, but I'm going to call it what I call it. I'm sorry. But they have lessons still to teach us. And so the first part is that I want them to have the opportunity to still share and teach and help us to grow. The second part is that I want to make sure that they are doing okay. I'm a graduate of Florida A&M University, and we had a famous alumni, Althea Gibbs, the tennis player.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, it came to light that she was struggling and it was like, oh my God. So alumni, they donated money or whatever to make sure she had everything she needed in her later years. But I want to make sure that none of our senior scientists are struggling and we don't know about it if there's a way that we can help. And a lot of times they just want to talk. They just want to talk. And I'm like, you know what? I grew up with my grandma. I have a listening ear. I could
Yeah.
and aha for hours. So that's what I do. But they do still have a lot of good ideas. And they call me when they're like, I think you should do this with AAWIP, and I cannot ignore them because they'll just call me again. So I have to listen to what they say, and they still have a lot to contribute, even if they're not physically in the lab. So
Mhm. Yeah, I really appreciate that. You've inspired me to think more critically about how we can ensure that Cohort Sisters is also working across generations, because that hasn't been um, kind of like at the forefront of our work and our mission. But as you've now talked about it, I'm like nodding along, like that's important, and that's definitely been an oversight on our part. So thanks for inspiring change on this end of the work as well. So we're going to start winding down. I have one last kind of question about your specific experiences, and then we'll wrap up with some general advice questions that we ask all of our guests on the Cohort Sisters podcast. So in addition to all the work that you do, you also are a motivational STEM speaker. Can you talk about how you tailor your motivational speeches, messages, workshops to different audiences? And again, I'm kind of curious about if you do anything differently in your speeches when you're talking to people of different ages, or when you're talking to STEM folks versus non-STEM folks, where you're talking to predominantly Black women in the room versus not predominantly Black women in the room. Do you kind of tweak the messaging or the story in any way?
absolutely. For each talk that I give, I definitely spend some time thinking about who is the audience and how can I best reach them. So if I'm talking to my son's fifth grade class, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a different talk than if I'm talking to undergrads. when I'm giving a talk at a QWIP, which is the Conference of Undergraduate Women in Physics, it's a diverse conference. It's all races, but it's all women and gender minorities. That's going to be a different talk than if I'm speaking at the National Society of Black Physicists. And so I try to tailor each talk to the audience so that I can best relate to them. And I might highlight different parts of my experiences so that, it may hit home differently for the different audiences. Um, One thing that I do is I definitely have different slide decks for the different age groups. But if I'm talking to a general science audience, then I'm going to pull back on a lot of the detailed physics as opposed to more like generalized experience. Whereas if I'm talking, when I gave a talk at the Society of Physics students, they were all about, I'm like, oh, I'm going to bring some equations in. I can bring in my geek jokes. I got an Einstein joke in there. Oh, yeah, we're going to do it all. So, yeah, I try to tailor it.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that. So, if you had to go back in time and redo your doctoral journey, what is something that you would do differently?
I think that the world would be different if I had taken the advice of my advisors at FAMU and gone to Vanderbilt the first time. I probably would have finished in 5 years instead of the 10 total that it took me between Brown and Hopkins. I probably would have pursued an academic route, and,
Hmm.
you know, that would be different, not just for me, but for all of the students, the undergrads, the other professors, the people I would have interacted with. So I
Hmm.
can't say that it would have been better for me. I can say that it would have been very different for me, for my family, for all the people who interact with me.
Hmm. Interesting. I was not expecting that response. I have so many follow-up questions, but we're almost out of time. Okay, let me ask one follow-up question. Have you ever considered exploring an academic career?
My life goal used to be president of Florida A&M University, so I have considered it. However, I think that with a traditional route, that's going to be close to me. I'm going to drop a couple bombs on you right now. You ready?
Okay.
My husband retired last year at the age of 49 from
Wow,
a
good for
long career
him.
with Lockheed Martin. And so we are considering, because I choose to work financially, I don't have to work. So we're considering eventually choosing to live in Tallahassee for a few years and teach classes outside of the tenure process because we're retired, but we still have a lot to contribute and to
Yeah.
give. It's something we're kicking around. We don't have
Mhm.
anything on paper, but it's an option where we can still contribute to academia, but outside of the tenure process.
Yeah, I
Um,
love that.
yeah.
I'm excited for that process when you get there. And congratulations to him for retiring. So our last question is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to current Black women and non-binary doctoral students, especially those who are in physics and other STEM fields?
Well, I'm sure that your other panelists have already given lots of advice about being in the lab and finishing grad school and stuff like that. My advice is outside of the lab. It is to be very critical about the relationships that you develop outside of the lab. Unfortunately, I had a relationship with a narcissist. And what I've learned through extricating myself from that relationship is that narcissists love highly qualified academic people. They love a PhD, and then they want to try to destroy you. So if you find that you're in a relationship that excludes you from all of your family and all of your friends, that alienates all the people who love you, take a moment to see if you should extricate yourself from that relationship. If you're in a relationship that is not serving you, it is okay to step back from that relationship. Even if I got married after I knew him for 3 months, and 3 months later I got divorced. It's okay to get out of a bad relationship. So be critical about the relationships and the people that you have around you. You're smart. You can apply that knowledge to many different things. Also apply it to your relationships.
Mm, you are right. That was not advice that we have heard yet on the podcast, but it is an essential advice. So thank you so much for sharing it with us. Thank you for sharing so much of your story, your journey, your ups and your downs, and your inspirational career with us today on the Cohort Sisters podcast. Thanks again, Dr. Miller.
And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you again for listening to this week's episode of the Cohort Sistas podcast. If you are a Black woman interested in joining the Cohort Sistas membership community, or you're looking for more information on how to support or partner with Cohort Sistas, please visit our website at www.cohortsistas.com. You can also find us on all social media platforms at Cohort Sistas. Don't forget to subscribe to the Cohort Sistas podcast and leave us a quick review wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and we'll catch you in next week's episode.